Hello, everybody. Michael Robertson Jr. here, and this is episode 11 of the Hallowed Horror Podcast. And of course, I have with me this evening my co host, Mr. Jason Collins.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Tonight is going to be a fun night. So, we have spent the last 3 episodes of the podcast discussing the HELL HOUSE LLC Trilogy, which we love the first one, and the next 2 are well worth the watch if to get the whole story, the whole picture. And if you listen to those episodes, you know that we had several questions that came up between Jason and I about how the movie was made, some of the plot points, just, tons of stuff that we wish we had the answer to. And I reached out to the writer-director of the HELL HOUSE LLC Trilogy, Stephen Cognetti, and he was kind enough to agree to come on the podcast and do an interview with us. So that is very exciting.
Yeah, I was so happy to get to sit down and talk with him. It was such a fun conversation we had.
Right. So we're not going to waste any more time. We will get you guys right into that interview, and then we'll come off the back and give our thoughts on it. All right, Stephen Cognetti, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah. So Jason and I, we watched, I actually watched HELL HOUSE LLC, the first one last fall. Was looking for a Halloween movie to watch and found it on Shudder, loved it, raved about it to Jason for the next few months, and he never watched it until we started doing this podcast, and I basically forced him to watch it so we could do an episode on it. He loved it. We finished the trilogy and had to reach out and hopefully get a chance to speak with you, and now here we are. So again, thank you very much, and we're excited to talk and get some of our own questions that we've been debating back and forth with, just stuff we would love to know about the film and the filmmaking process. So we're excited.
Sounds good. Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, I guess the first question, which is, how did this movie come to be? I mean, what was the process in terms of you getting the idea, writing the screenplay, and then, all of a sudden here it is on Shudder?
So it evolved over many years, and it all started with one of my principal investors giving me the idea, saying like, hey, why don't you try something in a haunted house setting? And I said, there might be something there. And I wrote many drafts of scripts. And when he told me that premise of something going on in a haunted house, I don't think he meant anything paranormal. But when it comes to horror, my favorite kind of horror is paranormal horror. I think he was thinking more slasher though. So I said, I'm taking your idea and I'm going a different direction. And then so I wrote this script that was awful. It was the first draft of HELL HOUSE. It was non-found footage. It was traditional narrative, and it was terrible. It sucked. I hated it. I had a few people read the first draft, and it was got some mainly like negative feedback, kind of like, no, this, like don't do that. So I kind of just went back to the drawing board and redid everything, and decided I just started incorporating more of the things that I like personally myself, which are abandoned photography. So I love exploring abandoned places, and so I added in that came where the whole idea is them taking over an abandoned hotel. That came from a passion of mine, just loving a story that an abandoned place tells. And then I love a good documentary of like those crime shows, like the 60 Minutes or Dateline. And I kind of went that route of, instead of investigating a crime, we're investigating an unknown paranormal event from a documentary standpoint. And I kind of start combining that. Then the story just started formulating more and more. And, I was living in New York City at the time, and I found this amazing, beautiful abandoned house out in Rockland County, New York, just randomly. And that just kept on clicking with the story that, so these guys, they found a place in Rockland County. They're from New York City, and they needed to leave the city, and it just evolved in there. So over about a 2-year process is when I finalized the shooting script that was ready to go.
Was it always meant to be a trilogy?
when I wrote that first few drafts of the script that I didn't like too much, at that point it was not meant to be a trilogy. But what had happened was that there was a lot more story elements that were lost when I transitioned from a traditional narrative to found footage documentary, and but there's a lot of like cool story elements that I lost that I liked, and I always wanted to go back and explore and flesh out more. And a lot of it had to do with the history of the Abaddon Hotel and a few foreshadowing moments of what would culminate after the Hell House incident. And so I guess what the trilogy came from is me going back and really wanting to expand on the lost elements of the story that were in the first drafts of the script of the Abaddon and everything like that. So the ideas were there, but just never fleshed out.
That's really interesting. That's almost something you see happen a lot in literature and writing. You know, so many authors are cutting pages out of drafts before they're published. I think even Stephen King had a whole section of The Shining cut out. Your story kind of reminds me of that, where there was like almost a novella before the actual published version of The Shining. I think it was called Before the Play or something like that, that was scrapped from the novel that would have explored some more of that backstory. So that's really interesting.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's a really, I love that answer that you just gave, because that's one of the biggest questions Jason and I have had discussing these films. Was we couldn't tell if it was always meant to be a trilogy or not. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and so once I always said when we were shooting, people would ask me about questions while we were shooting, like how are we going to do this, and I'd be like, oh, you know what. I remember a producer would always say, like, look at the script, be like, but like we're really not explaining this too well, and I'd be like, yeah, but don't worry, we'll address that when we film the sequel. And I always say that as a joke. It never meant it. It was never meant to be serious, though. But I did know, I knew there was a lot of like questions and mysteries within the movie that were answered. Like I had the answers to, but I just couldn't. It didn't feel right to expound on them in the film, and I cut a lot of it out and left it a mystery. And I always like kind of secretly hoped, even though I didn't think I was get the chance to, like, I'll later on I'll get a chance to like expound on all these like mysteries and story threads that we're dropping in this film. And luckily I was able to do that.
Awesome.
Nice. So where did Shudder come into play?
So they acquired the original, not exclusively. It had been on Amazon Prime, I think, before Shudder got interested in Hell House and added it to their catalog of films. And I think they knew that a lot of their subscription base were enjoying Hell House, which is great, because when Shudder picked it up, I've always been a huge fan of Shudder. I've subscribed myself before they ever even approached us. And so when they said, like, hey, we want to add you to our catalog of films, not to me directly, it was to a distribution company, Terra Films. I was like, you're kidding? Like, that's awesome. Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to be a part of Shudder. So it was just opening us up to a whole new audience of horror fans that probably hadn't gone to Amazon or to iTunes for horror. They probably stick to Shudder. And so then we just got a whole new group of an audience built when Shudder acquired the original. And then when I expressed interest of doing the sequel, they weren't even, I don't think, no, when we shot the sequel, I wrote and shot the sequel and planned the third one, they came in later and said, like, hey, we would love to premiere it on Shudder. And that was after we had shot it and everything like that. So that was just they went to distribution company and just to get exclusivity on a premiere before it went to other platforms. So and to me that was just like dream come true. Like, of course, absolutely. I'd love to premiere this film on Shudder, just because it's just Shudder is just such a genre specific platform and this film is such a genre specific film. It's a subgenre of the horror. I just knew that the film would be most appreciated. All three films would be most appreciated on the Shudder platforms. So we were just happy that they asked, and wanted us to be part of their catalog, because they have such great films. They curate so many great films from all around the world that to add us to it was very humbling.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really cool. We're both big fans of Shudder as well, and that's actually, I think I already said this, but that's where I actually found the film, was on Shudder initially. So.
Gotcha. Yeah. A lot. I think, especially for the original, because the original is the only one that's on Amazon Prime. So a lot of people get turned on to it first from Amazon Prime, but then there's a whole other segment of people that never saw it on Prime that then are finding it on Shudder, and Shudder's is expanding their audience, because they're just bringing in great great films, and then they're starting their own original series like Creepshow and all that. So
yeah,
it's great.
Nice. So what is the contract deal like with Shudder? I mean, are you locked in with them now, or is it just a set amount of years?
No, what Shudder does is they only want at least for HELL HOUSE, I don't know what they do with other films to curate that. They just wanted a certain amount of window of exclusivity for the films, and then it could, after a certain amount of maybe it was a year, I forget. It was we expanded it to other platforms from there, but except for Prime, I think there's all the difference in platforms is there's the AVOD, the SVOD, and TVOD, and all that, which is transactional video on demand, subscription video on demand, advertisement video on demand. So like a Tubi and a YouTube, their advertisements, and so Shudder would be in competition with like Amazon Prime and like Netflix, which are subscription video on demand. As opposed to iTunes, which is transactional on-demand movies. You pay per view, like whatever rental is, like $3.99, $4.99. So you just in those terms, when they acquire, I don't know if it's with other films, but when it comes to HELL HOUSE, it's just what they want is the exclusivity towards other subscription video. So we couldn't go on to Amazon Prime, for instance, or because that is a direct competitor of Shudder, where Amazon transactional, just Amazon rental is not. So that's like kind of how they work, the exclusivities. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's good.
Absolutely.
And that was one of the issues that I had when I was first recommending this movie to people. Primarily my readership on Facebook and the likes, I would say, you guys got to check this out, and I would post a link to the YouTube trailer, and I would get just response after response. Where can I watch this? Where can I watch this? And I was surprised at how many horror fans had not actually heard of Shudder. So it was interesting.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing. I think they're small, but they're growing and growing. So I think they're just getting bigger every year. But I saw that as well when I talked to horror fans, and like, yeah, you don't know Shudder, and I think it's just still growing, and they're increasing their footprint more and more.
Right. You mentioned writing the script for HELL HOUSE. I think you said based on the kind of the recommendation of one of your investors. How long have you? This is kind of a two-part question. I mean, have you been writing your whole life? Was it always with the idea of filmmaking? And have you always been writing in the horror genre, or did that just kind of happen based on the idea for HELL HOUSE?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because it's a little different for me. So I went to film school, did the whole route, and undergrad at Temple University in film, and I always saw myself as being a director and not a writer, because I'm probably, people that know me know that I can't spell worth a damn, let alone write. So, first draft of most scripts people are just like, dude, there's so many misspellings in this. And I'm like, okay, you know where I'm going. All right, forget me. So that's usually the first critique of every script I send out to people to read. But it turns out, like when you're a filmmaker, nobody's unknown and just coming out, and nobody's throwing scripts at you to direct. So obviously, if you want to direct something, usually for filmmakers that are young and just starting, they have to make their own stuff. And that's the way I approached it. I said, if I'm ever going to make a feature film, it's going to be a feature film that I write, because nobody's going to hand me their feature. So I did start out just making short films to gain experience in filmmaking, and they were mostly comedy. I think I'm more of a comedy-minded person to begin with, but I love the horror genre. And so basically what my investor had given me the idea, he said, like, he was mostly like, hey, like, we definitely want to, help you get started, and give you an investment in your first feature. And when I say an investment, it's very small. Our Hell House costs like very little money, comparatively speaking. So everyone, it's just getting together a few friends and family of like, $500 here, $1,000 there, and kind of putting it together and trying to make a budget together. But, he said, like, he gave me that, it clicked. He said, why aren't you making horror movies? And I said, I don't know why. I love the genre, and I never given it a try. And so I decided, like, hey, that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to start writing horror because I love it. And so Hell House was my first try at that. So that's how it came about.
So was Hell House not officially? Was it initially basically kind of a passion project of your own, where, like you said, you basically just financed it completely independent based on, like you said, donations and investments from people you knew? Was it before any studio or anything got involved at all?
Yeah, no studio got involved financially. So everything, even 2 and 3. So Shudder never financed anything. So everything was, the productions were all independently financed. A small group of people just that were the Hell House One investors. A few thousand here, a few thousand there, nothing much, and our budgets were so small. And yeah, it was a passion project. It was just I'd been working on it for years. I started writing it in probably 2011, and didn't show Hell House until 2014. 2015, like early 2015, and then it went to a festival in the fall of 2015. So it had been something I've been working on night and day for 4 years, while having a full-time job, and just getting up early in the morning. I would get up at 5 o'clock every morning, write for an hour or two, get on the subway, go to work, come back, go right to bed, then get up and do the same thing, just write, rewrite, and it's the same thing. After we were done shooting Hell House, I would edit only in the mornings, because I was working a full-time job in the city, and just get up in the morning and edit and get on the subway and go. So that's all I was doing outside of full-time work, was working on Hell House. And my wife loved me during that time. So
I bet. That's so amazing. And that actually brings up a couple questions for me, but I did want to bring up, you talked about, like personal financing and then friends and family. See, there's Cognetti Films, and we see in the credits there's a lot of Cognetti names under the producers. Is it like a family thing going on, or what's that about?
Cognetti Films is my company that I put together, and it's just me. But the film was mostly financed by family. They were all Cognettis, like cousins and a couple of my brothers. And so what I always tell people is spread out. If you're looking to make an indie film, if you ask a lot of people, you don't have to ask for much. Obviously, depending on your budget. If your budget's $1 million, then I don't know what to tell you, though. But
right.
If your budget was what ours is, we don't have to. I don't have to go to anyone and be like, "Hey, I need $50,000." Right. They're gonna say, "What? Get out of here! No way." But you keep the budget low. You spread out how many people I have to ask for money. You keep that low, and a lot of people were just excited to see, like, yeah, let's see what happens. They weren't really sure of the story. I would tell people this, like what I had in mind for Hell House and where I was going, and I tell you, a lot of people were kind of like, I don't know about this. Sounds weird. A lot of people, for reading the script first, would always be like, is it a documentary? What is it? And I'm like, it's a documentary. And they would be like, when you read in the script, it's really confusing from the perspectives, because you're jumping around perspectives a lot. Like we're in the found footage world, we're in the Hell House world, but then we're in the documentary world, and then it's post-documentary world at the end. And I kept on having to tell people, I'm like, trust me, this is gonna make sense when you see it. Like, right. It all, and when I put this all together, you're gonna like it. And it was a lot of those conversations. Yeah, it was mainly family. Just a couple people that weren't family that pitched in. But so yeah, there was a lot of Cognettis in the credits because of that.
It's really interesting that, I mean, I love the explanation you just gave about how this movie was made, because Jason and I have talked, I mean, ad nauseum, off the podcast, on the podcast, about what an amazing time it is to be a creator. I mean, just with all the tools and the platforms at people's disposals, there's just a market for everything. And, hearing your story and then seeing this film, and I mean, this is not an exaggeration. I would put HELL HOUSE LLC right up there on the mantle of found footage films with Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity. I mean, I love the film, and it's just amazing to me to hear your story. Just, the blood, sweat, and tears basically you squeezed in to make it, and the budget. You just don't need that massive budget to make a really effective film when you have a good story behind it.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. And I think the same thing when it comes to Paranormal and Blair Witch. They were very low budget, and I think I think I think their stories are very similar to mine. It probably different in budgets and everything, but I think kind of right around the same. But just you have an idea and you don't have a lot of money, but you want to get it done, and you get it done any way possible. So.
Yeah, you brought up some interesting points about giving the script to people and them getting what's going on here. We're confused. And that's another conversation Jason and I have had. From the writing perspective, I have been like pulling my hair out in our discussions, trying to figure out how you even write something like this from a script perspective. And we had a really big conversation about the Lazy Susan camera shot in the third film. We were talking about, how do you write for something like that? Because it was essentially, the way we were looking at it, a callback from the beginning of the film where they're interviewing the cast of the play, and the guy, they very clearly show this thing and he's talking about it, and then it doesn't show up again until the end of the film. And I was like, did he just write in a physical set piece that he knew he was going to use later to get a shot that he wanted? Like, what? That just blew my mind when I put that together. Was that the way that it happened, or was that more of like a spur of the moment idea when you were shooting?
Oh, no. The Lazy Susan thing was something we planned about. We rehearsed, we talked, and thought through for a long time. That was something I was very excited to shoot. Before I even wrote the script fully, I told the distribution company when I was talking about Hell House 3, I was like, I have this sequence planned I think is going to be really awesome. I just hope we'll be able to shoot it. It was the Lazy Susan scene. And so I'd always thought about something. I was trying to think of things we haven't seen in found footage yet, and I always like moving the camera around. And it was a tool for me to be able to kind of almost shoot narratively without it being a narrative. And just kind of like, how would the camera pan? Because the camera wouldn't move. If the camera moved like that narratively, but in found footage, you can't have the action being like almost, not that it's dolly, but like dollied in a way, following the action panning. And I wanted a way to like catch the whole scene happening in 360 without within a found footage world. And I thought a good device would be like, well, the camera would land on something and spin around and show us the gore and how everything would happen that way. And that's where that came from. And we needed to set that up, obviously, in the beginning, or people would be like, what are we spinning on? So the interviewer had to reference the Lazy Susan in order for for it to click later on when it lands on the Lazy Susan, be like, they're on that Lazy Susan. So
yeah. It broke my brain for a second, because it did kind of tear me out for just a moment, where I was like, wait a minute, how the hell is this camera doing this in found footage? Like, it completely pulled me out for just a second. And then when I realized what was happening, I was like, well, that's just freaking brilliant. I love that. So
thank you.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And I thought about that too. We talked about this a lot, and there were certain moments during the whole trilogy where we were like, oh, we wanted to see more information on like particular things happening, specifically the very end, where he gets that thing out of the safe, and he goes and battles. And I was like, what was that? We never got to see it. Like, why didn't they show it? But then I was like, oh, it's, we're looking at like CCTV, and it's like I felt like you had to be handcuffed in certain ways in telling the story.
Yeah,
and I'm sure that was difficult.
No, and you know what? And that was ambiguous, but not purposely so. Like when we first see Russell go into the safe, I think we lost a shot in there because something happened with the tech glitch. But I think I wanted more coverage on that about what he was actually getting out of the safe, and I think it was supposed to be more clear when we go to the basement. And what he's getting out of the safe is the stole, the priest's stole that they use in Exorcist, and it's the purple stole. So when I wrote that in, I wanted to be a mystery about what he put in the safe, but then want to know when he goes to retrieve it that it is, we find out the reveals that it's going to be the stole that priests use in Exorcist, but then when we're covering it, it's kind of like, that's really hard to show. So, right. and that did get lost in like what he was bringing out of there. And there's only one really clear shot, I think, in the film of him wearing it in the basement when he and Tully go at it. And but I still think it was too brief of a shot and moment for people for those two connections to come together. And so I did see that question a lot on social media.
That was that's a great explanation. I love the way that you had to leave a lot to the imagination just because of found footage and the way you have to shoot it.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing, and I think that's the. I always tell people there's benefits to found footage, but there's also lots of downside to found footage. The benefit to found footage is that we can shoot 90 pages in less than 2 weeks. That's most of our films have been about 12. I think we shot the original Hell House in about 13 days. And we can do that because it's found footage, because we can shoot 10 pages of script a day, or 8, anywhere from 8 to 10, or so, depending on the day, because you only have it's all about coverage. So if we're only covering a scene that's about 5 pages, but we're only covering it from one camera angle, then we can use our time more effectively during the day to shoot a lot more. But the downside of that is the coverage, is that you have a hand tied behind your back about what you can show and how you can show it. So you have to, and that's the thing about a lot of the scares and a lot of the action is you're limited in how you're able to show what is happening. And I didn't find that a problem in Hell House 1. I found that a problem in Hell House 2 and 3, especially more so in 3. Because there was a lot of scares that the biggest challenge in writing 2 and 3, it was not the story. The story was always there, but it's the scares. It's because we're going back to the same place 2 more times, and we're trying to have new original scares, but we're in the same exact place. So I wanted to every time I approach a scare, I'd be like, I wish I could cover this, have more coverage of this scare, like do a different angle or something like that. But we are locked into where the camera's supposed to be for the given character. And always, and that was the downside of found footage is it's tough to explore new ways to do a scare outside of who's holding the camera. So, for instance, Lazy Susan scene was a new way for me to get the camera moving in a different way that we hadn't seen before. So that's where that originated from. And so for me personally, I'm just like very excited to finally do a non-found footage film and to explore coverage of a horror set piece.
So does that mean you're working on something new right now?
Oh yeah, no. I mean, we were supposed to shoot a new feature this month in May, but obviously, and then came along COVID, and I was like, nobody's shooting anything. So I have this new feature that I was really excited about because I think the scares are really good, really original, and it's just a fun new take on a haunted house story, and it's called 8254 Forest Road. So everything's been pushed off, indefinitely. We don't really know when things are going to open up for production again. And then also, we're developing a series based on Hell House right now, and we were supposed to be meeting with people to see how we would get that funded and get that brought to audiences. We're supposed to do that in April. Those meetings got pushed off, so everything's been put on hold for me in terms of productions. But we'll see what happens in the future, though. But and that series is going to be. We're definitely going to do it. I just don't know when. The Hell House related series, that's going to be non-found footage too. It's going to be traditional narrative as well, which I'm just so excited to do. So
interesting. Are you writing? So both for the new feature you're referring to and the Hell House series, Are you writing and directing, or just directing, or?
So the feature I'm writing and directing, and in the series I am writing and directing, but I have a co-creator that's we're both working on this together now. Hell House's producer, Joe Bandelli. He and I have been kind of brainstorming the whole series together over the last probably 6 months.
Got it. Was he I think I was reading on IMDb, is he the guy that got put in the clown costume once or twice?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of people got put in that clown costume. Not just, I don't think there's anyone that got maybe outside of Ryan Jennifer, who's Sarah Hobble. Everyone had a turn in that clown costume. I was in it once. And Danny Bellini, the lead actor, Alex Taylor, he was in it. So it all depended on who could we spare at this moment that's free, not doing anything that day, and doesn't have to rehearse on other scenes or anything like that. Can they get into that clown costume? It ended up being Joe Bandelli a lot because sometimes for a producer on set, there's a lot of like, sure, I'll do it.
Right.
I'm like, you're here, you're getting in that costume. So. But what's funny about him is that he ended up playing a cameraman in all 3 films, and people didn't really notice it, and that is why we used him. And because he was Diane's cameraman at the end when she goes into 2C. He was Brock Davies' cameraman, and then he had more of a on-screen presence when he was Vanessa's cameraman in the third Hell House. So most times we were able to keep him off screen for the most part, so I didn't think audiences would know. And for the most part, they didn't. But he was in all 3 films and died in all 3 films. I guess not in the third one. So
I love that. We did have that question, like how much was actually filmed by the actual actors, and how much was done by like a cinematographer.
Yeah, it's in 1. It's mostly 1 and 2. It's mostly the actors. And in 3, it was mostly the cinematographer doing most of it. 3 was something. 3 was a different game because 3 we were, we had this set, and it was based on Sleep No More in New York, and we wanted to build the Abaddon into more of like theatrical looking sets and promenade style theater you walk through. So we did a lot more lighting and Carlos Garcia, he's our cinematographer for the film, is just a genius in lighting, and they came on, him and his team came to the Abaddon. They got there before anybody else, a few days before we even start shooting, and we just started rigging lights everywhere. While Angie Moyer, who owns the Haunt, and also plays the set designer, was building those sets for Insomnia, and then Carlos would be lighting them. And then when we got there with the cast and the rest of the crew, everything was already set and ready to go. So 3 was just a bigger production in that sense, because it just involved a lot more. It's more technical in that sense, and so it's great having Carlos on board though, because he's just such a great cinematographer, and him and his team did a great job on that.
Was writing 3? Well, believe me, I know that writing is not easy. Period. But was writing 3 more challenging with The fact that A, you were having to wrap up all the storylines, and then B, one thing Jason and I talked about when we were talking about the episode was the moment where Vanessa says, some of you have received cameras of your own, and my writer brain started thinking, okay, we've got multiple points of view getting ready to start happening here. Was it more difficult for all those reasons, or some of those reasons, or none of them?
I think in all these, it was difficult in writing the story, because the story was always there. I knew how I wanted to end it. It was when I have a story and then I know that I have to implement X amount of scares. And I have to make sure that we keep the scares going. And that's the challenging part, is like I had a few scares already in mind that they're teed up, ready to go. The one scare that I was from the get-go, I knew was going to be part of Hell House 3 was when the Jane goes down, takes the dare, goes down, and she's drunk, and she goes down the basement to touch the clown nose. I always knew that was going to be one of the scares, because that was something we had on set. Was on Hell House 1. We had teased one of the production manager, and her name is Natalie. Someone was like making a bet with her, like, how much would it take for you to go into the Abaddon by yourself and go into the basement, and that was like a real life joke that was going around, like who would go in there by themselves at night when there's no one there after we closed the set every night on Hell House 1. And I thought, oh, that's actually a good scare for 3. But coming up with new ways to scare people in the same exact locations you've been for 2 times before is the toughest part of the writing process. Story-wise, I always knew that I wanted to end it with like a Hell House sign-off, and kind of closing the story with them, and always ending it with a bigger grand event with Russell. And it was for me, it was more fun writing all that, and just the challenge came in is like making sure the scares aren't exactly the same as 1 and 2, and making sure they have their own unique twist to them, even though we're using some of the same props in almost the same exact room. It's like, how do you still keep that fresh? So that was the toughest part.
You did it's funny you say keeping it fresh and same props. That was something that Jason and I said when we were talking about the first Hell House, was every time we were amazed that every time that clown came on screen and it was one of those, look away and look back, oh, it's moved, or oh, it's not there. It was creepy every time. Like, how is this working that it's creepy every time? It was so well done. And
you took it to a whole new level in the third one, when she was walking away, when she went the dare scene, when she was like, she was angling away, and he was following the camera. That was the first time we really saw him move outside of him, like moving his hand in front of the door. But watching him like follow the camera, that was so creepy.
Yeah, and there's this video that I have that I've been meaning to post to social media. She's talking about that scare, the actress. And a fun fact is that's the Gore Abrams' sister, who plays Paul in the original. But she's talking about it to some other actors in the green room, and and she says that, and then especially on that take, and she says, I was holding the camera and the head moved with me so perfectly that I was terrified as it was happening. She didn't expect that movement, the head be working with her, and she saw it in the flip screen of the camera. And she said even seeing it in the flip screen, the head following her, terrified her, even though like we were, she was surrounded by crew, but just in the other room, she was terrified herself.
That's so good.
One of my favorite moments of that movie is actually right before that, before she goes down the stairs and she's kind of doing the selfie, with the camera, and you can see the Hell House crew at the bar behind her. I love that moment too. That was really cool.
Yeah, that was something I was wanted to do a scare like that in 2, brought it into 3, basically because the toughest thing was for me, logistically in planning Hell House, for me and everyone else involved in planning Hell House, was to get the cast and crew of Hell House 1 together in one spot. Just to get them together for a day of shooting was impossible, and because there's everyone's spread out all over the country, different states, and doing their own things. And so it all came together in Hell House 3, and I was able to, finesse. We had one day of them to be on set shooting all together and get that shot. I always wanted that really spooky shot of them behind the bar where they had been hanging out in Hell House 1, and I was able to get it for 3. So just that was very happy to get that.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, I bet. Speaking of the cast and crew, for the first one, how did you make that work with the cast? I mean, with it being, funded by friends and family, were most of the people in the first movie people that you knew already, or was there a casting call that you put out for that?
Yeah, it was casting call. It was so Jared Hacker, who plays Tony. I knew him, but everyone else we did so much casting in New York. I use Backstage.com for casting for all 3 films, and we just put out casting calls for characters, and we look at hundreds and sometimes when it came to 2,000 and 3,000 of reels for people, and just brought in from there. We whittle it down to like a group of 20 or 30 people that we'll see live, and I'll rent out one of those studios in New York all day and just bring people in, do some live readings, and then do callbacks, and it was one was probably a more lengthy casting process than the others, because there was such a chemistry that needed to be there, that we had so many different callbacks and chemistry reads with the cast. And then I felt like we finally landed on the so like Danny Bellini, for instance, who plays Alex Taylor, he originally came in to audition for Paul. And, he didn't fit Paul. I mean, he's a good actor, but he just wasn't right for the role of Paul. And so we discarded him. We're like, no, he's not Paul. And we realized that all the people are coming for Alex. We just weren't finding it and didn't like it. And I just said, like, hey, we all liked Danny as an actor. So, but he just wasn't right for Paul. Let's just bring him in and see what he does with Alex. And one of his auditions was just to come in. It was no lines. It was just improv. And we just told him to say, hey, just come in and tell us what's your favorite thing about owning and running a haunted house, and just tell us. There's no lines to anything. Just go at it. And this is complete improv scene. And it's on the special features of the DVD, and I think that's going to come out on Amazon pretty soon too, of his audition. Doing that, telling us what he loves about running Hell House and his favorite things about that, and that's how he won the part. So,
wow, that's really great. You talked about the chemistry between the cast for the first movie, and I mean, me and Michael talked about how great they were all together, and I wondered how much of that was improv and how much was scripted. Were they just thrown into a situation and they just had to react, or was there a lot of it scripted?
The majority of it is scripted, and I would always tell them, like, we're going to run a few takes of this strictly going by the script. And then if I feel like we have it covered, like we've got what we needed, and we're good on time, we're going to do a couple of takes of like where I say it's the wild card take, and we'll you can go by the essence of what's in the scene, but you don't have to go by the script word for word. And what I find is like they did well with that a lot, and then I would end up going to the editing room. In some scenes, I would have 70% of the scene was scripted, 30% is something they added on themselves on top of it. We had that for a lot of scenes. Some scenes were just straight to the script. Some scenes were a mix of script and improv. But I would say mostly everything was scripted or their own hybrid version of the script, of their lines, giving the essence of what their line was supposed to be, but kind of putting their own little twist on it themselves in some of the takes. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to make sure that they had time to do a lot of improv. So we freed up an afternoon of shooting for them, just gave them a camera and said, have at it. You guys are just going to go out. I forget what we were shooting, something else at that time. And I think we were actually shooting some of the special effects with Melissa in the basement that never made the final cut. It's actually, we do have all this green screen effect shots of Melissa being the girl that's chained in the basement. She's being pulled down through the floor, during the chaos, and we were able to finally finish that, and that's what's coming out in the director's cut on Amazon. But while we were shooting all of that stuff with her, the main cast of Hell House, they were going around in the hotel and all around the cornfield doing their own improv, and so I gave them the camera for a few hours. What I got back, like all this footage, so much nonsense, but and I remember I went through everything, and what I was able to pull from it was probably like 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes of improv that I placed kind of right in between Act 1 and Act 2. Or I would say mostly where Act 2 gets going, maybe, and it's when they get there, they're moving in, and they're all having fun. They're putting up signs. Joey comes in and does the eye trick, and it's basically there's probably like a 90 second window of them just like screwing around, and that's this like little improv window of like what I took from all that shooting of theirs and put it in right before our first big scare, which is the scare of Paul seeing the clown standing at the top of the basement steps. And it was just like a nice little segue of like showing them just kind of like goofing off, having fun. Nothing bad's happened yet. And then we just go right into that first big scare. So I did get some of the improv, and it worked for us.
Yeah, it really that aided to the ebb and flow of the whole film. Like it paced really well.
Yeah, that took a long time. There was a lot of cuts, a lot of people viewing all my cuts and giving me good feedback, and I was making a lot of changes for months on that cut, trying to make it. And I wanted to flow like a documentary. I treated it like a documentary, so I was really happy with how that final cut came out. It did seem to flow pretty well, and I was happy with that.
You mentioned, when you were working on the first film, how you would, you went from writing to shooting, and then your mornings were spent editing, and you've talked about, this as well. Did you actually edit all three of these films yourself?
Yeah. So 1 and 2, yes. 3, I edited, and then I handed off the final cut to Terra Films, who's the distribution company. We were going back and forth on that. On my cut, I think, for lack of a better word, they found my cut very boring. And they said like I said, she said, blah, blah, back and forth. We went back and forth on my cut for a long time, and then eventually they said, "Well, can we take a crack at it?" I said, "Absolutely. Here you go." I sent off the drives, and their editor Brad is he's very, very good at what he does, and and I was kind of like, I don't know what they're going to do, and they showed me their cut of their third one, and I liked it. I was, oh, okay. I said, yeah, you're right. That did pop a little bit more than what I was doing, and I think sometimes it takes. If you're writing and shooting and then you're editing something, I think it takes fresh eyes to get to where it needs to be, and I didn't have that fresh eyes. I wasn't giving it the fresh eyes, and so I think they were finding the cut bland, and I wasn't seeing that, and it took someone else, like taking it and showing me, like what the cut could look like, and I was like, oh, you're right, that is better, and so they finished the edit on 3. For sure, and so that's how that went.
It's interesting that you use the word bland for what is probably the most exciting of the 3 films in terms of just the chaos and the action.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I loved I think my cut of Acts 2 and 3, especially Acts 3. Especially the chaos, that was my favorite thing to piece together, because I was so personally invested in all that chaos that happened in the end of the third one. I was actually running camera on some of that, because like on Hell House 1 with the YouTube video in the beginning, I was running camera on that. I said, whatever, there's people running around with a camera, in a dangerous situation, I want it to be me holding the camera because I'm not going to sue myself if I get injured. So like I was bruised from all that, and I loved, not only, shooting it too. I was really excited to put it together. And so I think a lot of that stayed the same. But really what it was the first act, and I write slow burns. So, first acts can drag in my films, and the first act of Hell House 1, technically, I think if you took out the YouTube video, it would probably drag too. It's a lot of build-up until you start getting to your first main scare, which doesn't really come until I think probably late 30s, early 40 minutes is when the first big scare in Hell House 1 really comes, and that's when Paul sees the clown at the top of the stairs. So it takes a while to get there, but it's intentional that way. But I think so there's disagreements of like, should Act 1 pop more and everything like that, and I'm of the opinion that I don't think it needs to, but I certainly understand that. When I handed off the edit and I got it back, and they made Act 1 pop a little bit more, and I think it definitely did jump a little bit more. I appreciated their take on it, and so I was totally fine with it. I liked what they did at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, the finished product is really good. I am also I'm a big fan of the slow burn. I say that to people a lot. I think I've even said it to Jason a few times on our podcast over the last couple months. I'm a big fan of slow burn, whether it's literary or if it's on screen. I don't like a lot of I shouldn't say I don't prefer the in your face all the time scares. And I like the story to build. I like story over I guess the visuals a lot of times. So
it's like a slow rising in the tension that's gradual throughout the film, and this film doesn't start at 100 miles per hour, but like gets there. And I think it's a lot of fun for the audience to take it in that way.
Yeah, and with the first Hell House, I think it really allowed you to meet the characters, to meet that crew, and to get a feel for them before things really start happening.
Yeah. So, and that's one thing we definitely needed to do, is we needed people to believe these people, they were friends, and created a haunted house together, and so that was really important, especially in 1, to make sure that we had those moments in the first act.
When you were editing, did you so for 1 and 2, how close was the finished cut to your script?
It was like really close, because I only remember I just remember Brian Harnick, who shot the first Hell House, the cinematographer for Hell House 1, just messaged me actually not too long ago, just saying, we're just catching up and everything. And he's like, I still go back in Hell House, and he said, I'm shocked, like the one film that was so close, the closest to the script of what the final product was that he's ever shot. And he's worked on a lot of films, and I didn't even think about it. I'm like, I didn't even know that's a thing that people think about, like how close is it to. But yeah, I guess it is. There's only things that we lost, but we lost some scenes that I would have loved to have added in. One of them being the Melissa being pulled through the ground in the basement, and and that was the whole thing. It was either going to be bad special effects or not do it at all. We have to obviously not to do it at all. And so that was the whole thing. Like, less is more was the MO of the whole, especially in the original film is don't show it. It's subtlety is everything. Less is more. I think it was very close. If you read the script and you watched the movie, they'd be very close together.
That's awesome. That's great. I mean, because then you're really just, your initial vision in your head, you're seeing the whole thing on the screen. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I was really happy to be able to do that. And I think it's just, if you have the time, and we had the time, because I was had a full-time job, so I was able to really take my time with that edit, take my time with the script, and then in shooting, I was able to get everything I wanted, basically because even though we were so low budget, it's found footage, so we were able to get it in about 12 to 13 days. So I was just fortunate to be able to do that.
Yeah. So what was your day job before Hell House?
Oh, I was working in New York City for ITV Studios. Um, they're a television production company, mainly reality TV, and just working for them. A beautiful part of New York City. I was able to work in the West Village, and so which is a great area of Manhattan. Loved working there. Great people. We had a great boss. That was when I told her I was going to make a feature. Does she mind if I take 2 weeks off? She was like, sure. She's like, I know this isn't. You're not going to make a career working as a production assistant here. So she's like, go ahead, do that. And she let me take the time off to make it, and so that's fortunate. And I know it's got to be so tough for a lot of people that want to get into film, want to shoot films, but like you still got to keep your day job to pay the bills, and it's so tough to find that to be able to do that. And so my boss doing that, obviously I wasn't getting paid when I was gone, but I was able to afford that the hit in the paycheck to go away and film Hell House. But everything came together. Just having a good job in New York that paid the bills, and while I slowly put this movie together over some time, was great.
Yeah, that's Jason and I are kind of living that same kind of path where fortunately we have our jobs, our day jobs, but we have these side businesses with the creatives that we're like you said, you get up early and you write, you get up early and you edit. We're doing the same thing for our side hustles as well, if you will. So can definitely respect that. That's awesome. I'm glad you got that opportunity.
I think that's the majority of us, that are indie filmmakers, indie writers, novelists. And it's, most people aren't getting paid $1 million to make a film or write a book, but most of us are trying to do this on the side and do it because we love it. So we're not really doing it for money. Especially me, nobody got rich on Hell House. So it's still just all about passion and yeah, definitely. It was a side job that I wasn't able to commit too many hours a day towards, but I was able to do enough hours for a long enough time and put it together. Finally, show it back in 2015. I think is when we premiered it at Telluride Horror Film Festival. So,
and there was a gap of what, like, was it 3 years in between the first and the second in terms of when they're released?
Yeah, and the reason for that, because when Hell House first came out, I want to say it was November of 2016. Yeah, it was November 2016. Hell House came out. No recognition. It was just this random found footage film just kind of dropped onto Amazon and iTunes. In Terra Films, they do some basic promotion and everything, but there's only so much you can do. And it got some looks, but it never really reached a bigger audience until a year later in 2017, when it went to the summer of 2017, when it went to Amazon Prime, and then it reached a gigantic audience. Prime is a good place for filmmakers to get their movie onto, just because you're not going to make a lot of money on Prime because Amazon doesn't really pay out too much. But if you're like me, the whole thing is like I just want people to see it. And Prime opened up Hell House to a bigger audience. And that's, really at the end of the day, what an indie filmmaker wants is just to get an audience. And I think, and that's what Prime provided, was opening up to a bigger audience. And so by 2017, it started taking off a little bit more. And then I think that's when it began to get on the radar of Shudder as well.
Nice. So with the first one, you weren't able to dedicate all of your time now. Are you able to do that now towards filmmaking in general?
Yes. Right now I am full-time writing all the time. Although up until the pandemic, because up until March, I was full-time writing. Now I'm full-time dad with kids that are home from daycare and school. And so There's really it's back to kind of like the full-time job where I'm only writing like a little bit in the morning now, and then the kids are awake, and then I'm with them all day, so because my wife is also, she's working, but she's still working, so she's on the clock working from home, and so I'm mostly with the kids. We split some time. I take a few hours in the morning to do some casting for. I'm still doing virtual casting through Skype and everything for 825 Forest Road, the feature. In finishing, and also still just doing a lot of development for the Abaddon tapes, the series that we're making for the Hell House series. So I'm working less hours now than I was, but mostly my job is writing.
Nice. Well, being the dad job's a great job to have, and but it's very exciting about everything else that you're doing. I love to hear that whole series, that whole story.
Which story?
Just your story, how it's come full circle at this point, where you're working early mornings and late nights, and now you're able to dedicate full time to it.
Yeah. So no, I can't wait to get back to shooting. I can't wait to do 825 Forest Road, but we can't get back to work until things are safe. Who knows when that's going to be? So in the time being, I'm just writing, improving scripts, and improving all of the scares that I already have written, and fleshing out more of the story for the Abaddon tapes, and just really enjoying the time with the kids. I always tell my wife, I'm like, it's just, we're gonna look back at some point and be like, miss this time we spent with them and had, and it's been fun. Time I didn't think I was gonna have. I thought I'd just be working, but now we're just with the kids all the time. It's fun. It is a blessing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, agreed. Everything's kind of slowed down for a lot of people, and I think there's been some positive repercussions of that to go along with all the negative stuff we keep hearing on the news.
There's so much negative, there's so much tragedy, but everybody has their story of something they're taking away from this, and that they're reevaluating in their own lives, and there's going to be a lot of that coming out of this. And there's going to be a lot of positivity coming from all of this.
Yep, I hope so. I definitely agree. And hopefully, with everybody staying home, more people will be able to find your film and watch it and have some fun. So, Stephen Cognetti, we want to thank you so much for spending this hour with us. We really appreciate it. Was really excited to talk to you. This conversation did not disappoint. It's been a lot of fun. So, thank you very much for coming on.
Awesome. Hey, no, glad to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Where can people find you on the social medias?
I'm mostly active on Twitter, so that's my platform of choice. So I am, just search me Stephen Cognetti on Twitter, you'll find me. And but for anything Hell House related, the Terror Films runs the Facebook page. So any new news regarding what we're doing with Hell House, anything we're doing with the series, go to the Hell House page on Facebook, and that's where you'll find anything updated, any new updates with regards to that.
Great.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much again, people. If you haven't seen HELL HOUSE LLC, head over to Shudder, Amazon, go check it out. You won't regret it, I promise. Stephen, thanks again so much.
Thank you.
All right, we're back. So that was a lot of fun. That was so much fun, actually. I had a great time speaking with him.
Yeah, we were all over the place with the questions, but I mean, it was like you said, from a creative perspective, from a filmmaking, from story to, just living life and doing things outside of because he said he had a 9-to-5 job when he made the first HELL HOUSE, and how that all the difficulties ran into. It was just, we had so many questions, and he was was very kind to answer all of them.
Super nice. I mean, he answered the questions great, gave us so much information. I mean, it was a pleasure to talk to him. I had a lot of fun. And like you said, we went all over the place from just so many different perspectives. And he gave us all the answers we wanted, all those questions that we had. I mean, who better to give us the answer than the guy that literally created the entire thing. So that was a lot of fun.
The source.
Yeah. And you're right. The whole story with, him writing the screenplay in the mornings, getting up before he went to work, and then taking the time off to be able to shoot it, and then editing it and just building it to be what it, came today. It's just so cool to hear, because that's the quote unquote dream that so many, creatives have. Whatever your creative arts field is you want to eventually be able to transition to do that full time. And he made some awesome films, and it sounds like now he's lucky enough to be able to do that. Yeah,
it's really satisfying to hear that somebody goes through that grind and comes out the other side.
Yeah. I think my favorite my favorite discussion was the Lazy Susan camera shot from the third film, because you and I talked about that at length in the episode for the third film. Where was that set up intentionally? Was that always going to be the plot device for the camera to spin? And the fact that it was, that he set that up in the beginning and then called back to it in the end. And I think he said that he actually had that idea like ready to go to pitch before they even like started, really.
And I bet he was, because he talked about how shooting a found footage genre, you get handcuffed with angles and perspectives and things like that. So being able to put the camera on something that's moving without somebody actually doing it themselves, I'm sure it was just like, yes, some freedom of a pan.
Right. Yeah, that was interesting. Hearing him talk about, some of the limitations, which you had cited, with the with Russell in the third film again, some of the limitations of what we were seeing, what they couldn't show us for, reasons because of the genre. And then I think he actually said there was another shot they were supposed to get that just didn't work out from technical reasons, it sounded like. So that was all really interesting. And, also good to hear that, or exciting, I should say, to hear that there seems to be some more coming for the Hell House storyline with the Abaddon tapes, which is a series he's working on.
That'll really be interesting. And I'm super excited to hear about his other projects too coming along.
Yeah, that's and neither of which are found footage. So he said he was excited to be able to have more of a narrative storytelling, which is really cool. It sounds like that the fact that again that he's writing and directing the feature, like that excites me, because to be able to write this project, to write this story, then be able to take it and then go make it your own, for the screen, that's really cool. Really excited to see, what that turns out to be when it's finished, assuming that we all get to go back to living somewhat of a normal life anytime soon.
That's true. It was good to hear. I don't know. It's affecting everybody, right? He had to put a stop on production for that one. I forget the name of it now, but it sounded like an address or a street name.
It was an address of a house, I think.
Yeah, he had to put a stop on that production and a few other things, casting, and he's just living the life like the rest of us.
Right, being a dad, he said, which
you
know what that's like, don't you, right now?
Yep, it's a good gig.
So again, we're not going to waste any more of your guys' time. I think the majority of the interesting stuff was said in the interview, which again, Stephen Cognetti, thank you so much for being able to take some time with us. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to it as much as Jason and I enjoyed having the conversation. Jason, anything else tonight?
No, sir. All good.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been episode 11 of the Hallowed Horror Podcast. We sat down with Stephen Cognetti, writer and director of the HELL HOUSE LLC Trilogy, which if up until this point you still haven't watched, you need to go do that immediately because it is amazing. And until next week, hope you guys stay safe, be well, and we'll talk soon.